ladies and gentlemen, welcome here. I understand there's some people still coming, but I think we can get started. Seeing some new faces. I don't think we've seen before. Oh, you see, somewhere here in the shade. But welcome here. I hope you had a great month, Emeka. Can you believe Emeka wants me to do a presentation to his brothers from Nigeria by giving me 3 days lead time?
It's ample.
Do you think it's ample?
Well,
for Nigerians?
I think you were generous. You were generous. You should have all the knowledge.
that's the point.
And all the time.
And all the
That's
time.
the
All the time's an issue.
That's the point.
But welcome to everybody, to our friends, in particular our PhD colleagues, because I always want to remind myself, this is your sessions. Aslam, it's about you guys. And talking to each other and sharing experiences and frustrations that you may have. So welcome to all your colleagues that's in the same boat as you are. And I also like to say welcome to our guest speaker. We're going to start off by you telling us about your research. Aslam is focusing on the influence of transformation on consumer behavior, and he wants to talk about the South African typology.
Yes.
Quite heavy.
It is.
Yeah. Influence of transformation. Now, obviously, I'm intrigued to know how does he define transformation, if he took the South African view of transformation, or whether he took a global view of transformation, because as a PhD, I would hope there's something global around it.
There is something.
Okay. So welcome, you can present to us and we will talk. Please intersect if you want to ask questions, or if it goes in too much of a monologue. Lawrence, please then talk to him. Joyce, welcome you. Okay, let's go.
Thank you, Prof. You know, Prof's always got a style of calming everybody down. It wasn't the case with myself and him last week, on Wednesday or so, we had a call. He's put me under a lot of pressure here. The reason being is he cited that previous Curiositas didn't add the right type of value to the audience. So he had a bit of an interrogation session with me and asked me all these clinical, difficult questions about design and methodology, etc. What I'm going to do today is basically take you through my journey. And I just don't want it to be my presentation. Let's keep it interactive. Those of you that want to seek value out of this time that you've allotted, it's only going to be extracted if you ask the right question. So the journey is going to be quite simple. I'm going to look at my philosophical paradigm, and then I'm going to give you a background to the topic itself and why the topic in terms of transformation and South African typology. And then we get into the meaty bits, which is the research philosophy. So those of you who don't know, I'm Aslam Ismail. I work for a company called Mart in the domain of global business process. We are acquired by a company called Walmart. Walmart, as you know, is the biggest retailer in the world. And obviously from a standards and procedures point of view, they should be doing something correct. I'm not going to give too much away because that's also influenced my choice and my topic in terms of the PhD that I'm doing. Let's get into the philosophical paradigm. I think to discuss philosophy and the paradigm of the researcher, you've got to talk about two aspects. One is the ontology, and I'd like to discuss the ontology. So basically, what has informed me about what the research should look like? Very important, I think we are in a newfound democracy. So some of you may be skeptical and say 21 years down the line, is it still newfound? It's newfound because of the transformation journey. And I feel that the transformation journey from a government perspective has not yet achieved. So if you ask me, the transformation vector, is that going to continue? My answer is going to be yes, certainly. And that is going to impact what I call consumer behavior. Consumer behavior in the realm of this topic has got to do with the retail consumer and how that consumer behaves. Again, I'm going to qualify later when we come into the selection of the topic and the research methodology, how I've actually niched the research. So we are in an emerging economy, everybody knows that, that's not contested. I am groomed in retail. I've got a 25-year history in retail. I love the industry. So I keep saying that retail is about people and product. I lean more towards people, and I'm fascinated by people and their behaviors. Let's talk about socio-political change. Obviously, it's a government objective in the South African context. You'll find, and if we talk about the reach of this research, there are similar countries, particularly emerging economies, and African countries in particular, they've got a similar objective. So I think, to answer you directly, there will be more far-reaching use of such a PhD, and I will qualify that later. We have a band of people called previously disadvantaged people. Similarly, we have a band of people called previously advantaged people. That to me is very unique, and that has shaped my typology, which I'm going to explain to you later. Those of you that have traveled, you do know that there is a gap in our service levels in retail in particular. I'm focused on retail. Particularly those of you that have gone to Europe and Americas, you'll find there is a gap in our retail standard. And I hopefully want to plug that gap. Let's look at epistemology. So retail, I said, is about people and product. Then I did qualify that Walmart is the world's biggest or largest retailer. You don't just become as big as they are by luck. There's some strategy, there's some focus there, there's some essence in their strategy that has appealed to me, and that essence leans towards service as well, which I've incorporated in my thesis. Globalization has changed the landscape of retail. You felt it as customers. You've seen how many niche products are coming up from a retail offering. It's not only the Shoe City and Incredible Connection. I mean, you get businesses like Behaviour nowadays, specialized dough makers. That too is a gap in the industry. So that's come through globalization. Globalization has influenced our thinking pattern. The Consumer Protection Act, I think, has done a lot in terms of injecting consumer self-confidence. Again, more so on the previously disadvantaged sector, and not so much on the previously advantaged sector. The growth in middle income, we're not contesting it. And then obviously we're looking at transformation and how this requirement, there's a new requirement breeding from transformation. And that comes in customer behavior. Customers are not behaving the way they used to 15 and 20 years ago. And they're not going to be behaving the same like they did today, tomorrow. And that's going to be a given. That is a given. And I've got theoretical backing to substantiate that view. The retail competitive landscape is quite arduous. You guys know that. Every little vacant land today in South Africa, first mushrooms a mall, and in the mall, what's there? 80 to 90% of its capacity is retail outlets. Get a few banking malls and some service sectors, but that's it. And then obviously from a retail point of view, I think if you want to survive in the future, it's important that businesses start to differentiate. So that's just a quick background. I want to give you my perspective in terms of the research study. So the topic, I'm going to read this out clearly. It says it's the influence of transformation on customer behavior. And then it says it's a South African typology. So you'll find I've got two variables in the topic. The one is transformation and the other one's consumer behavior. Transformation in this context is going to be the primary variable because I think it's got an overarching feel and impact on the entire population, and it permeates through society irrespective of which part of the spectrum, of my spectrum, of the typology you're going to lie. So whether you're previously the advantage or previously disadvantage, transformation is going to affect you. All right? I'm going to hold back on the typology because I think if I clarify it later in terms of my questionnaire design and in terms of my research methodology, you'll find how the typology is going to help me. So why the study of consumer behavior? I'm going to take a definition by South African authors. That's Robert Lambert and Parumasur. And they define consumer behavior as a study of individuals, groups, organizations, and processes they use to select, secure, and dispose of products, services, experiences, or ideas, needs, and satisfies the impact of these procedures have on consumer and society. Wordy, wordy, wordy. And that's exactly what I found out throughout my research. It is very, very difficult to find a single, clearly defined definition of consumer behavior. And again, it depends on the author's flavor. And a lot of what comes from consumer behavior theory and consumer behavior literature is influenced by marketers. And I'm going to talk to you about that later. And that to me has obscured the thinking about consumer behavior, because marketers, in essence, I think they got a selfish initiative behind why they want to study consumer behavior. I'll qualify that later. So the cited gap in the theory is basically on the commentary that you get after the theory has been exposed. You find there's a lot of focus, particularly from marketers, on the 4 Ps. I'm not going to explain that. All right? But it's, again, the initiative is selfish. Selfish in the sense that they work bottom up. They've got a product or a service that they need to justify, sell, or they've got to publicize. And they've got to see how common or what's the relative success of it even before it's launched. Whereas in my thesis, I'm going to invert that. I'm going to, they do that, and then they understand what behavior the consumer is going to do to match the product and to link it to the product. And yes, it will be more appealing to kids if it's yellow in color, and now the millennials or the X generation would like it in gray or black. So that's the type of information they extract up by studying consumer behavior. Whereas this thesis is going to invert that. We're going to say, how do consumers behave, why did they behave that way, and what's the service and products we should be giving them. So it's a very generalized view. The changing environment, I love this. It's by Duplessis, again a South African author. He says, conflict and transformation should be viewed synonymously. And I was thinking as South Africans, how real? How real? I mean, now and then when you get in your car in the morning and you're on the way to work and you hear on the radio station, there's a protest here, or there's some sort of blockage on the other end, or the buses are not running. What's that? That's conflict. Caused by what? We're in a transforming society. Is that going to stop in the near future? I can't tell you. There's a possibility that it will continue. I can say yes, confidence. Because you're going to get someone that's unhappy and somebody that's happy. And that's the perfect recipe for conflict. Liederach, who I researched quite extensively, particularly on the South African plateau, in terms of how we talk to one another, our communication, the government objectives, and what we've achieved in the last century, in the last decade. He's quite forthright in terms of his commentary on that. He says, change must be viewed descriptively and prescriptively. This to me was a wow factor, and it has influenced my overview and has influenced my contextualization to a large extent. Because I had to sit down and think about change as he is asked. First of all, describe the change. Very much what Prof asked now. What is the change? What's the transformation is change? So what's the change and what is changing? I had to first grasp that. And the difficulty was, it was just so broad. Everything is changing in the South African context. What am I going to talk about in my thesis? So I had to narrow that down. And then again, when he says prescriptively, if this is changing, what's the impact of that change? That's the prescription. If we change a policy in terms of liquor, the Liquor Act, which is a fact as well in the retail environment, how does it change the way we behave in liquor, in the liquor industry? More importantly, are we conditioned to change in a way that will satisfy the expectations of our customers? And that was a prescription I had to delve into. I want to talk very quickly about Walmart and Massmart. So Walmart acquired Massmart. Everybody knows about it. Very contentious, very topical. Walmart's come with a reputation of being miserly, and Walmart's come with a reputation of being penny pinchers. And obviously they haven't got the greatest ethical labor standard reputation internationally. All that has impacted the takeover, particularly from a unionized point of view. This again had to be brought into the thesis, because there's a sector of the population which is called organized labor, and they've got a vehement opposition towards Walmart. I must say it's subsiding now, because it's it's like the devil you don't know. It's always greater than the devil you know. So I think now by association, let's calm down a lot. But I want to tell you that Walmart's success to me, and I'm fortunate in my job that I travel there almost once every 6 months. I'm in Walmart in the USA. And their walls are full with quotations from the founder, which was Sam Walton. And all he emphasized was, look after your customer. And how do you look after the customer? By giving him the right service. I'm going to give you a quote later that's going to blow your mind, probably. But Sam said this. He says, if we work together, we'll lower the cost of living for everyone. We'll give the world an opportunity to see what it's like to serve and to save and to have a better life. And I said, wow, can I give this little message to Jacob Zuma? Thabo Mbeki was out of the scene by that time I started with my PhD. But isn't this exactly what the South African government needs? I mean, if you're talking about social and political upliftment, here's a man from a business point of view that positioned his business with the social upgrade of its customers.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
If I may.
Pleasure, yeah, with pleasure.
So what is the timeline of the question that he asked?
Sorry?
When did he ask that question?
This was in 1965.
65, so it's after the war, baby boomers.
Yes, in his area.
Okay.
Okay, and it's quite apt. It's also because he was facing what we call the hypermarket concept was being released in America. You know, and there was a few people like Target, etc., that wanted to do similar, and he wanted to position himself differently. So what he did, he pulled at the heartstring of the consumer. Come and buy from us, support us, and we'll save. You'll save, and if you save, you live better. And I'm happy if you live better. I mean, it was great, eh? That thought pattern permeates throughout the strategic view of Walmart right up to today. And I don't say that because I'm affiliated to them. I say that because I've experienced it. I've been in Costa Rica, I've been in ESDA, which is in the UK, and when a Walmart representative is there and you ask you about a certain view, so that it won't be 5 or 10 minutes into the conversation and he'll ask you, so how's it going to benefit the customer? So that's genuine about them, well, at least in my view. Let's get into the meaty bits. And please, I said, you can stop me at any time. You don't have to even lift your hand or just raise a question at any time. So my research philosophy is shaped by trying to close this gap in theory. Right? I know there's great amount of theory in terms of consumer behavior. And I didn't even keep a proper tab, but eventually I knew that my bank account is being drained by the amount of books I'm buying. So I had to cautiously stop. I had to tell myself, stop and niche what you're reading. So the subject consumer behavior seems to be very, very popular. And there are professors in Egypt, there are universities in North Africa that write on the subject. The thing about being a PhD student is you got to read what you want to know. And that's always difficult. So the choices in philosophy is positivism versus interpretism versus constructionism. Where do you fit your philosophy? And I think a lot of those difficult questions are answered by your intent and the outcome of your research. And that no one's going to help you with. Yes, you've got credible supervisors, both field and academic supervisors. You've got to stay close to them. And I'm going to qualify that later. You've got to stay close to them. Okay, I'm going to give them a minute.
No, it's fine.
Okay. And then, you know, your supervisors will ask you, and they ask you just tongue-in-cheek, so is your method deductive or inductive? And you got to go, excuse me? You know, particularly when you've been asked. Benny did it to me last week in terms of methodology and design. And I think sometimes we confuse issues. But once your intention is clear and you know exactly what your pathway is on your thesis, all these difficult academic questions unravel themselves. And you've got to find yourself a think tank. Unfortunately, my think tank is the toilet. I think very well in the toilet. My phone doesn't ring there, I don't know for some reason. And when my toilet time is actually quality time.
Sanctuary.
I mean, it's a relief both ways, but I mean, I get...
We get the picture.
Brilliant. Another big daunting question is going to be, they're going to ask you, are your methods deductive, inductive? I asked you that. And then is it qualitative or quantitative? You're going to hear this all the time. You're going to hear this all the time. And the minute you're a research student, these are terminologies you're not going to be able to escape from. And you got to pen them down, you got to bed them down, and you got to answer them. Otherwise, you just compromise the quality of your research. And I'm going to help you with that as we go through. So, the last one that I want to talk about is mixed methodology. That's when you want to do a little bit of everything, right? But just don't do a little bit of everything because it's convenient. Do it for the right reasons. And hopefully I'm going to convince you that I'm doing a little bit of everything for the right reasons. What's very important, and I see my field supervisor is not yet here, Professor Chinanoma, he then, from his wisdom, shared the fact that your philosophy is going to impact on your methodology, and your methodology is going to impact on your design. There's no other sequence to that. Absorb that right now. I'm telling you, you're going to save yourself a lot of time figuring this out. You got to sort out your philosophy right from the front, and from there everything will fall into place. So what are the factors that affected my choice of philosophy? In my instance, it was the literature on consumer behavior, which I told you was particularly scant in terms of the external environment, and I felt I could build a case around that. And through reading, I found more and more confidence that there is a case, and I wanted to build that case. I then spoke to my supervisors, and they echoed the same sentiment, so I knew, yes, I'm in with that. Cultural perspectives acknowledge long-term influence on consumer consumption behaviors. So when you study consumer behavior, I think 80% of it has got to do with culture and psychology. Again, you've got to read between the lines. Because marketers put their influence on there, and before you know it, you're all groomed into reading 110 pages and it doesn't tell you anything. So you've got to be cautious there, and I just wanted to get away from that clutter of marketing people dominating this subject. And then social political transformation, like I told you, I think it's a vector that's going to continue. And again, you find it's an international trend with developing countries. Russia is not out of it, China is not out of it, India is not out of it. I just went to BRICS, all the BRICS countries. But then again, what about North Africa? What about Kenya? What about Nigeria? We're talking about Ethiopia now. They're going to be very soon where we are, where there's going to be this transformation vector. There's going to be a swell in the middle income population sector. And after that, it's going to be a service issue. It's going to be a strategy issue. And retail industry champions and leaders got to listen to what the customer changing needs will be. So my research flow and study is quite simple. So this is not the methodology or the design; it's the research flow. Again, once you work through your proposal, this flow is going to help you in your proposal, because you got to know from your proposal what meat you're going to put to the bones after you've done the proposal. And I have very much kept the structure because it's conditioned my thinking. So my thesis follows the following structure. It's an overview to the study, contextualization. I've got a theoretical framework. Research methodology follows thereafter. The analysis and finding is going to be obviously as a subset of the research methodology. And then I'm going to surface whatever new knowledge comes, draw my recommendations, and do the conclusion. Again, stay close to your supervisor. A few people in the room know my secret. I'm on my third academic supervisor. Not by choice, don't look at me as a monster. I think it was on the other side, not by my fault in any event. But what has happened is, I've then rewritten my first 3 chapters 3 times. Because you will find when you deal with your supervisors, they've got preferences. They've got preferences, it's worked for them. They've got a logic in their mind that actually gives you the flow of a thesis. And once you've exposed your philosophy, they'll give you that guidance. So I had to do 1 or 2 chapters again to actually confine to their structure. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of you reshaping the content to make more academic sense for somebody who's going to read it. And that to me and to you should be good advice. Because when you're writing, don't write for yourself. Write for somebody who's going to read your thesis. And I know we all got sometimes, and I'm guilty of that, we've got a preconditioned outcome of your thesis. When you hope so badly that, if you do have a hypothesis, you know, you got a leaning. I want to either prove it or disprove it. And you got a leaning. Don't shape your thesis to get to your preferences. You're going to lose your focus. All right. So this is difficult stuff, and you've got to be in a think tank as often as possible for that. From the day you start talking to your supervisor, take down notes. Please take down notes. Because you'll be engrossed in certain part of your research, and then you'll try and recollect what exactly did he or she tell me here. And I think it's unfair to keep phoning or sending a mail and saying, can you tell me about this particular part? Because the supervisor themselves don't know, in all cases, what was the last conversation he or she had with you. And it's essentially a follow-up on this conversation. So make copious notes and say, remember, Prof, you told me this or that. I'm at the junction now where I can't fathom this out. And then you'll get proper guidance. So even when you interact with them with some pointed direction. Otherwise you just get answers that leaves you on your own. So the research methodology, again, is impacted by the fact that there's no shortage of advice on research methodology. So by the time you do your research and you look at what methodology looks like, even South African authors are getting into it now. There's books 215 pages big just talking about research methodology. You know what I found great? The Da Vinci Notes. The Da Vinci Notes gives you such a great view of what methodology should look like. Stay close to those notes. Curlinger defines research methodology as the following: a careful systematic investigation in some field of knowledge undertaken to establish facts or principles or to find answers to a problem. If you look at this definition, that's exactly what it is. That's what you should be focusing on. What you should always look at is try to aim to present information in a logical flow. And I think sometimes we get so engrossed in it, and if you haven't got these field supervisors and research supervisors to assist you, you find that you get engrossed in your own writing. And your logic permeates throughout your thesis. And that doesn't mean it's the right logic. Because if you understand what you're writing, that's not enough. A third party is going to understand it and use them as sounding boards all the time. I'm lucky I brought some of my colleagues with that have assisted me through the process, and they've done reading. They know the subject probably as good as I, and that's because they're constantly reading and advising on what should happen. I say talk to your research supervisor every time you come to crossroads. If you've got two choices and you're not sure which is the right choice, pick up the phone, send an email, set up a meeting, and you'll get a view. All right. Lastly, on the methodology side, I just want to say is, if you've got any bias and anticipations of what your outcome should be, remove them. Because in any event, you're going to get your qualification if you're sincere and if you're honest about the process that you followed. And if the process that you followed has got scientific rigor and it does adhere to a PhD requirement, there's no need to fail. But if the answer is different to what you expected, so be it. Let's just be honest about it. Particularly if you've got a hypothesis that you so badly want to prove, and through your research you couldn't prove it. Just say it. I couldn't prove it. And that way, what happens is you champion the learning rather than chasing a degree. And I think if you chase a degree, you're a loser. But if you're chasing the learning, I think you're going to come out a winner. So what was my learning from this section here? It's not easy to segregate all these academic requirements to what you want to put on paper. And again, I struggle with issues like your methodology, your objectives, your aims. Sometimes they'll tell you there's no distinction between objectives and aims. And then you read further and somebody tells you an objective is this and an aim is this. You just got to work through it. You just got to work through what's in here and what you want to take out. All right? Also talk to your supervisors. And whenever you get to this quandary, use the think tank. Not strictly my think tank, Use your thinking. I want to talk to you about deductive and inductive approaches. I'm not too far from the end, if you don't mind. So philosophy again, what I've done is I've taken my supervisor's direction on how to work through philosophy. So I'm going to talk about deductive and inductive methods, and then I've broken down on the side, through my dialogue with him, some key characteristics. So process flow, from a deductive point of view, you find it's theory, hypothesis, observation, and then confirmation. They call it the waterfall method. It's a top-down method. And then you have inductive thinking, all right, which is you basically start with observation. You find the patterns in observation. You look at a tentative hypothesis if you can, and then you get the theory to justify it. That they call the bottom-up, and they call it the rock climbing method. So they call it a rock climbing method. The minute you look at it, you say rock climbing, waterfall. Waterfall seems easier than rock climbing. So I might as well go on the easy pathway. It's not going to work. It will be detected by your content in your subject. So the characteristics of a deductive method starts with a general perspective, and it concludes with a more specific and detailed perspective. Whereas an inductive method, you commences with a more specific view and then comes down to a generalized view, which you've got to substantiate through your research. And then philosophy again, from an inductive point of view, I think it's got to do with more positivism and naturalism. Whereas you come to an inductive point of view, it's got to do with interpretism and a lot of constructionism. So my particular choice was an inductive method, and because a lot of what I'm doing, it is a mixed methodology, tends to be inductive. And we will work through it again. Let's just talk about the quality and the qualitative and quantitative divide. Again, you'll find the academics that you associate with, they love this topic. They even got short names for it. They'll talk to you and tell you, is yours qual or quant? You've got to scratch your head now. And they are basically asking you, is it a qualitative method or is it a quantitative method? And you got to now, through your mind, unravel all this. What's he asking for? Basically, if you tend towards the qualitative method, again, it's positivism. The methodology is scientific, the hypothesis, and it's driven by deductive and reliable, reproducible, objective, and generalizable evidence. The methods are large-scale surveys, questionnaires, and obviously the analysis is more statistical and mathematical. If you come to the quantitative tradition, you will find that it's got to do a lot of constructivism and interpretivism. The methodology has got to do with phenomenons, and it's inductive, like I said earlier. It's got to do a lot with intuition, what you feel about a particular situation. The methods are small-scale interviewing, a lot of observation and document analysis. And the actual analysis is thematic. You've got to find a theme in it, and you've got to surface the theme and talk about the behaviors or the discoveries within that theme. Again, my particular research, it's got a bit of quantitative evaluation, but it's got strong leanings to the qualitative tradition. So this is what Benny brought me here for. Prof wanted to know what's my research design. So the research design, I find, is the blueprint of your thesis. This is actually the heartbeat of the thesis, because it's going to dictate what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and in the end of the day, what you want to regurgitate from the process. And whatever you got to regurgitate, you know it's got to be academic, it's got to have a logic to it, and it's got to be substantiated. So what I've done is I've examined my intent and my outcome simultaneously. What do you intend to do? And if you intend to do this, what will be the outcome of that intention? And do those two synchronize? And if they do synchronize, I've jotted it down. I've taken some notes from my supervisor in particular, and I've built this checklist for you. I've also taken from some of the writings of Phelps, Ellis, and Fisher to compile this checklist for myself, and I can share it with the students later to make sure that I'm on the right direction. So first I said, unravel the complexities of a particular situation, event, or a phenomenon. And in my case, it's asked, how does socio-political transformation influence customer behavior? That's it. The next one is know the possible implications and intricacies of a particular challenge. And what will my challenge be? What will we discover? And what I discover, will I be able to share it from an academic point of view to the retail industry? And knowing the retail industry, they're very, very, very finicky about what type of information you're pushing up into the alley. Does it apply to them? Does it apply to them today? And will it apply to them in the near future? Talk about a distant future now? No, you can't. We leave that to the Japanese. All right. Search for understanding. Again, you can only get this by theoretical research. You don't know the subject as much as people that are writing about it and who've got a passion about it. And the more you read, the more you formulate a view which you can substantiate and you can talk to people about. You need to find a workable solution, and in this case, yes, you just got to surface new knowledge. When they talk to you about doing a PhD, everybody emphasizes that the difference between a PhD and an MBA is the ability to surface new knowledge. And this drove me straight into my think tank again, back in the toilet. Because it's not an easy thing. I mean, particularly if you've gone to an MBA, I'm going to go through the process and whatever I find, I'm going to find. But in a PhD, they ask you to bring something new to the party. And that comes right in the front if you examine your philosophy and you know your intent. And then you'll be able to answer this and grant yourself a bit of self-confidence that I'm on the right track. Measurements, I'm not too serious about measurements here, although it will be required when you bring in your data and you do analyze your data. Because people want to know what's the difference. And then you've got to be scientific about it and you've got to bring in your measurements. What are you going to improve? What are you going to change? There's a lot that you can do, but again, focus on what you're going to do. My particular change is going to be the quality of service that I'm extending to people that have undergone transformation. Simple as that. I'm not going to muzzle it up with too many facts. So sometimes they ask you as particular academics, are you going to minimize costs or reduce waste? My thesis is not about that. So I disqualified on that point. Wow. So what? I'm not going to have a nightmare. There's 15 other points that I qualify on. All right. And then obviously to offer robust recommendations. What to do to the retail industry? If you do this, your service is going to be rated that way, and you run the risk of not having credible customers or happy customers. And unhappy customers will cost you profits. That's the message. So the research design, if I need to elaborate on it, I need this now. It's
playing trombone.
Yeah, up and down. Okay. So I'm going to define the research problem. This is my design. I'm going to formulate the goals for the research. Again, goals and aims. People will ask you what's the difference. You work it out. Very much the same. You got to survey literature, and again, I told you the issue about your philosophy. This comes into play right there. And then you got to summarize and conclude that part. Right? Thereafter, you got to decide on your method, and I'm going to talk about that right now. What your research method is going to be, how you're going to prepare questionnaires, etc. I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. Conduct research and collect your primary data. That's the data that you own, and that will be the signature of your research. You got to do your analysis. Again, there's a lot of advice on how the analysis should be done. I'm going to work through that very quickly with you. And then service factors that influence the validity of your study. And last but not least, you're going to make recommendations. So what were the learnings again about trying to work on the research design? You got to do this. You got to do this. You cannot say I want to do a PhD and I'm not going to look at research design. There's certain things which you got to do by choice, but research design is something that's actually it's compulsory in my view, because it's just going to give you so much structure. It's going to just give you so much purpose, and it's going to fashion you. So once it fashions you, it's going to set parallels, and you're going to operate between those parallels. Again, everything in the research design is linked to your aims and objectives. And again, back to your philosophy and your outcome and your want. So you're going to have a problem statement, which I'll talk about later. It's also going to fashion a lot of your choices. It's going to impact on your philosophy. It's going to impact on your research design. So if you want a credible research document, a credible thesis, you got to look at the research design quite prescriptively. And you got to ask yourself again, am I dotting the I's and crossing the T's here? And all I got to say for you, good luck in that part. It's not easy. And if you've got a chance, use the think tank again. I emphasize here that this part is not easy. And I said, lean towards your supervisors. I'm fortunate, I've got an arsenal of supervisors from a field research point of view. I got Fahim, who's a qualified industrial engineer and a business analyst. I've got Les, who is a store general manager, and with him is his marketing executive, and they've all fashioned my research pathway, and helped me to niche it into what I think will be a credible research. And I brought my wife as well with. She's the biggest critic because she says, "Aren't you coming to sleep, honey?" Maybe a little later.
Where's your wife?
She's also my editor, by the way. Yeah. My wife is the one with the headgear. She's just pretending. She's brought the angelic look. I'll get the devil look at her. So I said, whatever you do here, just be mindful of your thesis flow. And a lot of your supervisors will talk to you about this. If there's a disconnect in the flow, you're going to lose reader interest. And I think if somebody's going to adjudicate over your thesis and the flow isn't there, you're going to complicate matters for yourself. So just understand, and they've got simple techniques that help you with that. A chapter prelude and a summary conclusion for every chapter. So just be open about it. This is what I'm going to do here, and after you did it, this is what I did here, and this is what I'm going to do next. So you link that flow, and you got to do that for your readers. Now it's time to talk about my typology. I think you'll find that doing research is quite a complicated challenge. And you'll find there's not a shortage of literature. I know I've read some theses where there's been a gap in the literature. Mine is one of those. But there's enormous literature on transformation and on consumer behavior. So you have to niche that down. Then again, if we talk about consumers, who's consumers? Everyone's a consumer. And when you talk about the impact of transformation, particularly in the country where we come from, you'll find that the legacy of apartheid does permeate through society, some 21 years later. It's a fact. And it's fashioned the way we think. What I wanted to avoid is talking about whites and blacks, Indians and colors. I wanted to avoid that. I think it's just too stereotyped. And I think you turn people off by start talking about race now. Although you can't avoid it in a society that we live in. So the typology came with a lot of pain. And it was the Department of Trade and Industry that actually helped me sort this out in one of their readings. We talk about very simply, and the terms are not new to you, not foreign to you. Sorry, not foreign to you. It's called previously advantaged and previously disadvantaged people. So I've structured my typology on previously advantaged and previously disadvantaged people. Two reasons for that. Whatever I want to bring out from how we behave differently, the typology will help me. But instead of having multiple discussions, I have two discussions now. Previously advantaged and previously disadvantaged. So I ask myself, Aslam, did you compromise your research information flow? That is typology. Did you just cut your stream of information flow by half or by 80%? And I said, no. Because the crux and the focus of this is on that typology. So the typology does stand. Again, this was serious think tank stuff. Right? You had to sit there and work it out. And fortunately with me, I got the guidance from the Department of Trade and Industry, and they defined previously disadvantaged people as South African citizens of color, Indian, born to indigenous African and colours, who prior to 1994 had limited economic, political and educational opportunity. Isn't this a wow factor? It's just so apt and so academic in terms of what you want to do, rather than talking about black people and white people, etc. Why the typology was important again? I don't think the legacy of apartheid is going to be easily obliterated. And no, I'm not affiliated to the ANC. But you find everything that goes right or everything that goes wrong goes back to apartheid. More importantly, whatever goes wrong, the blame goes to apartheid. And I think there are people in society that think that way. And we can't escape from that. They think that way because their grooming is that way. It's going to take many years for that for us to eradicate that. And even if we do, there's something else from a transformation vector that's going to come into play. Whether it's general social upliftment, whether it's quality of education, whether it is gay rights or whatever it may be. And when people have an opinion about that, it's going to fashion the way they think. So the marketers again are very prescriptive here. They'll carve this consumer into 110 blocks, and you just got to be mindful about which one you want to talk about in the roundup now. The problem statement. The development of service strategies among South African retailers is formulated in the absence of or with a limited understanding of the socio-political impact that transformation has on the behavior of consumers. That's my problem statement. It's wordy, but at least it gives the reader a view of what I want to do, or what I want to try and attain to achieve. So everybody asks you, have you got a hypothesis? And I say, I haven't got a hypothesis. Because somehow people think that if you don't have a hypothesis, your thesis is not academic enough. You don't have to have an hypothesis. Depends on your methodology. All right? And again, you've got to get this right very quickly. What's the overarching aim? The overarching aim is therefore to allow people to understand and unravel the historical complexities of socio-political transformation, and to excite retail leaders in particular with a comprehensive model for the assessment of consumer behavior. Consumer behavior models are very, very comprehensive today. They've started by looking at the learning theories, then they've gone into society from a cultural point of view, and they've looked at your influence vector. Right? But they stop there. The external environment, everybody talks about the economy, but the economy, whether you rich or poor, affects you the same. Right? Doesn't mean that if you're rich and the economy is down, you're in a happier position than a poorer person. A poorer person is probably just in a more difficult block of life than you are, but the effect is the same. So I also worked out I worked out a model to help me work on my questions. So your research questions is very, very critical. When you're designing your questionnaire, stay close to your supervisors again. All right? And you've got to ask yourself certain key questions to know that you're on the right track. If you do this type of questionnaire, what type of knowledge you want to put out? What type of opinion you want to surface? And you've got to be sincere about that. In my opinion here, there was an issue about society. How does society think about a particular issue? Does society think about transformation the same way that I'm perhaps thinking about it, and that business leaders are thinking about it? Find it out. Put it in your questionnaire. How will the findings advance the people that you're actually talking about? That's societies, communities, and retail leadership. In my instance, and then again, what improvements to professional practice will there be? In this case, it's going to be retail service strategy. And more importantly, and only you can answer this, what is the importance of your research for yourself and for the audience that you're targeting? And I think for yourself is to complete a PhD and obviously to answer your question. Data collection methods.
Okay, I'm going to say time now.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
2 pages.
I think because our time is running out, and I think you're giving a lot and a very rich
Yes.
text for us to listen. But I want us to pause for a moment.
No problem.
Okay. Because I almost want to make sure, where are you taking us with your research? And I want to summarize it. Are you saying, Aslam, that you're working from an interpretivist framework?
Yes.
So you're working inductive, according to yourself?
Yes.
And you're working with observation primarily?
Yes.
And you're working with a thematic analysis?
Yes.
And you're working qualitatively?
Yes.
All right.
I do have elements of quantitative.
Because you said mixed method.
Yeah. It's a mixed method.
So you've got a bit of a combination of positivist and interpretivist.
Yes. Excellent. More interpretivist.
But you're more on the interpretivist.
Yes.
Fine. So can I, from that point, because I think Aslam gave us really A lot.
Sure.
But let's help him just with what he's given to us in this, before we even look at the details of how he gathered the data. Can I have questions at this point? What you want? Any questions you want to ask him to make sure easy on that track in what you hear, the way he presents it, easy on that track. I was tempted to say Sachaba, but I knew you didn't come in the beginning. So you're really off the hook, brother. Listen.
Yeah, maybe my question basically will be on, he's talking about the two the categories that he's going to use for, I think it's part of the data collection in terms of previously disadvantaged.
It's typology.
Yes, the typology and those who are advantaged. And looking at the transformation that the country has undergone so far, you have the middle market, so the middle class individuals, which is mostly blacks and whites, and then but now in your you said it's typology, you focusing on the previously disadvantaged. And then the advantage, I think, is just a fraction, about 8 to 10%. So don't you think maybe your analysis or your end results will be skewed towards the majority who are the previously disadvantaged?
Okay,
and also considering that there are more majority who even qualified to the portion of...
Well, so I think that's an excellent comment, and I don't want you necessarily to respond on it now, because I want to raise the question, if he works from an interpretivist point of view, what informed that typology? Because I do agree with you, his typology is potentially going to squeeze him. Aslam, you want to comment?
Good. Right, so the dilemma around the typology was actually to give substance to the research. Transformation has affected us as citizens, right? And I know that through my readings on transformation. And somehow I brought up, how do you describe which citizens are affected in which way? I would have to then make it a color issue, right? But remember, the information is on service provision of service. And you're right, both of you are absolutely right. First of all is, how did I get informed about the typology? Where did I get the typology? Like I told you, it was research and wanting to quantify who the customer is. And also from a research point of view, not to talk about it in a complicated way. So if the majority of people come from a previously disadvantaged sector, and that majority is, like how you say, the swelling middle class, so be it. I'm not going to change those facts. It's actually more relevant that I should understand how they are thinking if they're going to be 80 to 90% of my customer base. From a retail perspective, we don't like to discount anybody else, because that 10-15% could be the difference between a profitable and a non-profitable organization. So I've included them in terms of previously advantaged and previously disadvantaged, and also trying to get that opinion. So what's important here, and you talk about from an interpreter's point of view, is if you study transformation and you want to understand how it's impacting on people, there's an interpretation vector there that could be very personal. And again, it's got to do with your own ontology and your own epistemology, how you've been affected by it. And I think every customer that walks into your environment, it comes with this baggage. Do we understand it? No, we don't. Are we going to try to understand it? Yes, just read my thesis.
So I want to make a comment on that before Emeka, you go there. So if you say, you know, and what I think he's smart in, Wilson, is he's defining his parameters. So you can't catch him, sort of, because he said this is what I'm going to do. Now, if it's a PhD thesis, which must have global relevance, what is the relevance of South African typology for transformation of retail services? Wilson, what's the relevance?
I'm going to help Wilson.
Can he answer that question? No, do you think he can answer it? If that is his typology. Can he put this thesis into the global arena?
In the global arena, I'm not sure. You know, the
Okay, so you're not sure. That's okay. And that's enough of an answer, which you must just think about. So you're fine in determining your parameters, but you must ask yourself, because you're busy with a very dynamic study, how does it talk to a global perspective? How do I incorporate this essay typology on transformation into a global world?
Yes.
All right, just a comment on that, okay? Let's move on. I know here's a question also. You're right? Yes.
I think
Les.
Thank you, Prof. Sorry. Aslam, you spoke about the different transformation from a disadvantage and an advantage perspective. You also spoke about the marketers and how they would approach the different customer segments for more on accessibility. So I don't know if I'm in terms of if I'm on the right track in the questions, I apologize. I want to just understand some content. First of all, transformation is an adaptation to the POPI Act. It's currently quite evident in our society now. We're under huge pressure from that aspect. The other point I want to understand is that you look at it from a generation of disadvantage. We look at it from a customer segment perspective, where we would never differentiate between the advantage or disadvantage. We align that to an LSM living standard measures, or in terms of different customer segments, namely, if I want to target stationery, and it's really from a market aspect, I will target kids to try and get the mummies and daddies to come and shop. So there's always a question about, is that ethical or unethical? Are you compromising some of your organizational values for that? So I'm just trying to link your view to a customer segment perspective.
But I think what I hear, Les, you've got two different frames.
Correct. Yes.
And the one is not right and the one is wrong.
Correct.
But I think, and you don't need to answer, you must just be aware of this.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's a statement.
You must be aware of it and you must articulate it. So, I mean, you could respond, but you don't need to respond. Do you want to respond?
Not particularly to him.
Okay, but you'll be aware of
because
it.
he works with me.
But remember, but important, he can be your examiner.
He is, and for
he
now,
can be
what's
your
happening-
external examiner.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to pass me right now because he's
Yeah,
got.
but just be aware of that. Okay, next question. Yes, Farim. Oh, sorry, were you first?
Yeah, actually, you were asking from a global perspective point of view now that this is a PhD. And I was thinking, I think it has an implication on both the South African context and as well as the global area. Due to the mere fact that if you look at the South African context, you're trying to understand your market, as it were, in terms of how you impact your market, in terms of understanding your walk-in clients, if that could be the case. And then from a global perspective, you're looking at a point of perhaps the developed world could be looking in and saying, can we invest in South Africa? Do we understand the market? And if we do, how does it impact our organizational structure and philosophy?
And how do we then align to that typology of advantage and disadvantage?
So that's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
so he's saying he's giving you a reason out of the corner.
Yes.
Okay, Farim?
Fine.
Just going back to the setting of parameters, where you said you've got your topology, previously disadvantage and advantage. Your thesis is around customer service, and just to be cognizant, previously expectation of customer service from previously disadvantage topology is might be different to that requirement from a previously advantage. The level of service required and the level of the customer service and customer behavior will be different in that. Do you take that into consideration? How would you, because your survey is based on those two, the customer behavior.
Well, just to add to his confusion, there's just a PhD study concluded on that, and it did not show any difference.
Okay.
So you can answer to both.
Yeah, well, in the next, he flies around with me. He's not flying business class next time. Yeah, he knows the answer to it, and that's part of the rigorous debate we have. He's absolutely right, and it's a combination of. I'd like to answer broadly very quickly with a two-liner. It's not about the topology. The topology is about giving me structure, but it's about the thinking of the topology. That topology in the discussion, in the realm of transformation will exist. What's happening in Nicaragua, what's happening in China, what's happening in India, what's happening or what's going to happen in Nigeria. And let's put our hands together and hope Zimbabwe comes out of its rut. What's going to happen? They're going to go through the same process. And you get people thinking about service and expectations differently, because they're going to be affected differently by transformation. And I think the relevance of that, not only the way you spoke about South Africa, about foreigners understanding South African context, it's about taking a South African thesis and applying it to an evolving, developing or emerging economy. Every emerging economy has got some characteristics of this transformation in it. And that would be the value. I cannot prescribe the topology, but I can prescribe the behaviors within the topology to them.
Okay, got it. Emeka, we're just going to take one more.
You know, I was a little bit confused listening to you. And I don't know whether you are delivering a lecture on how to do research or whether you are talking about your own research. Yeah. So the only time I got an idea of what you are attempting to do is the time you read what we call the research question.
Topic.
Problem.
Or problem statement.
Yeah. But that looks like a hypothesis actually. If you read back through it again and see what the hypothesis means, what you read out there is the hypothesis. But you may not have to argue right now.
Well, it could also be it's his idea.
Yeah, his idea. He said he doesn't.
Yeah.
There are certain things he has made up his mind about. He looks like he has made up his mind about so many things. Too many things he made up his mind. He ruled out a lot of things, and that's not how to do this kind of a research.
Okay.
I believe that he's preempting and judging the whole situation. So I know you are going to listen to your supervisor a lot, you know. But it is not a lecture about listening to your supervisor, you know. It is not a lecture about listening to your supervisor or relying to your supervisor. So I was expecting to hear a cross-examination of theories, you know, what you have come out, what you have found in literature. You said that literature is diverse and there isn't a very there isn't an agreement on what is transformation and impact in this. I was expecting to hear, you know, these issues, you know, how we have gone through what literature is talking about and what theory is talking about, and where the niche is. You are going to place your own argument. You know, I haven't heard that, but the point is this: if you take a 21-year change in South Africa, let's look at it from time, okay? From the perspective of time. South Africa has gone through 21 years of change, okay? And America has gone through 21 years of change within the same period. If you go and check the parameters of change or the circumstances of change in South Africa and America within that period, don't you think that they're going to see similarities? Irrespective of the fact that you are talking about a society here in South Africa where there was a particular kind of government political situation that segregated against certain color divides, and suddenly there is a transformation to bring everybody together. So if you do a proper analysis of what that transformation has been within this period, and see who has been the beneficiaries of this transformation, and to see how it has affected consumerism, okay? And that's, I believe, what you are attempting to do. And you go to America at the same time and see, you know, where they don't have this kind of political situation that we have in South Africa. And you check a 21-year transformation. Don't you think you are going to see the same things?
Okay,
and in that case, it will be, what we are going to find is not going to be unique in South Africa. Do you get the point now? Right. So that is the kind of an analysis from a theoretical perspective, okay? Whether the theoretical anchor of your thesis is going to be applicable to South Africa, or whether it's going to have a global perspective.
Right.
You get it.
Okay, so before you answer, Aslam, because our time is running out, and I love the fact that you having this debate. I wish we must have you again. I think you raise a very valuable point, because he made an interesting comment at some point. He said, "My intent and my outcome are defined at the same time."
Yeah, that's the point.
And I think what Emeka is making you aware of, it's okay that you've defined smartly so your parameters. But don't allow yourself to miss the opportunity to get under the skin of this thing.
Yes, and I think
because although you say mixed method, What he's alluding to is there's very little interpretivism here.
Yes, because he's actually right in one part. Is a lot of it was on just the research design rather than the whole theoretical background, etc. I think I could have explained that, but you didn't give me enough time, 45 minutes. There was a lot of literature on that and how I came to the gap, and that's quite exciting in itself. But again, I want to, just to answer you both, intent and outcome. The intent of the outcome doesn't have to be prescriptive. Outcome in my mind is, would there be honest research done to come to an answer? The outcome is not defined to say, I want to prove or disprove that. The outcome is the research methodology and design structured to get me to a point where I want to get the right answer? That's all.
No. It's not where you want to get, it is what will emerge.
What you want?
What will emerge?
Yes.
I mean, allow it to emerge.
Sorry, it's just a play on words.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's what I want to surface through the
Yeah.
process.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. We should have a cup of tea about the theory, etc. I've actually fashioned this on a little bit of information about talking about actual research, design, and methodology. I didn't go into so much of the literature. It would be great to have the discussion with you. I just want another two seconds in terms of your distinction, and I totally object on your view towards the 21-year change in South Africa and America. I find it's totally incomparable. And that is why I got to share my learnings with you. I think there's certain broad bases where we all cling to. Transformation is transformation, and things will change. But the degree of change and the impact of change, remember, on consumer behavior in the South African context, because of our history, in my opinion, is affected very differently. That 50 or 200-year history is irrelevant in an American society compared to the freshness of a 21-year history here. And I think we don't deal with it hard enough. It will change, and you're absolutely right. If you compare Europe and America, you can have the same debate. South Africa is unique. Is my thesis going to be unique? No. The examination is going to be unique. But the answer will probably come out where it will have international value.
But I think what I find great is I'm comforted that you are aware of all the dimensions and angles related to the research process, Aslam.
Yes.
And that's very comforting. And I want you to continue on that journey. But I think be aware, what do you mean with mixed method?
Yes.
And then you have to play it even-handedly if you say mixed.
Yes.
Or you must decide it's actually not mixed, it's actually positivist.
More leaning towards.
And stay to the positivist.
Yes.
Because your framing, what you shared, leans towards the positivist rather than to the interpretivist.
Okay.
So just think around that. And I would say when you do your problem statement, my sense was you defined two problems there. And I think you should stick to one problem. I think that it's a very complex problem statement.
Yes.
I think you can simplify that.
Pleasure.
From my just have a review on that.
Definitely.
But I want to say thank you, and I hope that you can solicit more discussion with colleagues afterwards.
Yes, I definitely will.
I wouldn't have minded to be your supervisor.
Gentleman behind you.
Yes, last comment.
He mentioned the fact that, I think I agree to a certain extent, the change in South Africa and other economies might not be exactly the same. Perhaps in your literature review you can look at the Asian economies, because I think the change happened a little bit more rapid and it's quite prominent there.
Yeah.
However, when you say your thesis is not gonna be unique, I think it's gotta be unique through your theoretical frame and everything else, so that it brings new knowledge. If it's not gonna be unique,
No, you're right there.
then there's a problem.
No, you're right. Absolutely right. It is a unique study.
All right, so I'm going to say time out. We're going to continue this discussion afterwards, but now we've got our guest from industry.